G'day everyone, it's Calvin here, and I've got a couple of sheep in the shed to have a bit of a chat about. Now, one of the things I quite like is the discussion around the different sheep and different options that we have. That's what my day looks like. So one of the things I'd like to have on this channel is a discussion around the options that we've got with our shedding sheep. And these two are a really good example of that discussion and what's going on and why I'm making these decisions. And not everyone agrees with the decisions I'm making. And that's okay, because you need to make decisions that are right for you and for your system. But let's have a look at these two sheep and I'll tell you a little bit more about them. Instead of looking at me, we'll look at the sheep. So a bit of history on these two. What I've got here is a pair of two-tooths. So they were about 18 months old. I actually purchased them as lambs from a shedding sale at Tikawiti, kind of by accident. I was watching the sale. Ewes were going sort of $300. They were a little bit hungry. They were a little bit small. You can see that, and the one at the back there was the biggest of them, $400. And I actually culled her last year to my neighbours, Scruffies. Did a bit of a deal with my neighbours. He's got woolies. I love the stompy feet. It's going to go in here. We got to 130 and the bidding stopped and I owned them. They've got the stompy feet because Poppy is here. So because the big one, I think her number is number 60, because she was woolly, hadn't shed nicely as a lamb, I culled her to my neighbours because my neighbour had woolly sheep. And then I kept the other one. It didn't get in lamb. It had access to a ram. And I was just interested to watch its shedding. It's got a much shorter wool. Now, this one had a beautiful lamb. It must have gone with the ram as soon as the ram. She had access to the ram pretty much. She lambed late August, weaned a massive lamb. It was fantastic. It would have been a good 40 kilo lamb. So it was maybe not massive, but it was a good lamb. The three at the far end there, they're out of the Suffolks. And the two at this end, one's out of that Hogget and one's out of Marigold. So there is some shedding going on, but not as much as I, of course, would like. But you can see it doesn't shed properly. She would be the biggest of my two-tooths. She came back to me because the neighbour has changed his farming systems and he doesn't want to run any sheep because he's going overseas and doesn't want to have to leave his farm in charge of, well, someone in charge of his farm with some sheep because of the work you have to do with sheep. Now I'm looking for excuses to cull sheep and I've got too many. And it seems a real disappointment because she's a big-bodied, very good-looking ewe. But she's going. Today the butcher is coming and I'm improving my flock. Now, some people would say that's worth keeping and putting to a better shedding ram. And hey, I don't disagree with that. Would be a good option. That would actually be a fantastic sheep for someone who is converting over to a shedding sheep as a base. If we looked at the lamb, I would say the lamb would have been around about the 40 kilos at weaning. I've got another ewe who's a lot smaller, and she weaned a pair of twins, and they would have been in the high 20s. So if we look at lamb meat weaned, then a couple of my twinning hoggets, well, now two-tooths, would have actually produced more lamb than this ewe. Though when you look at the stockiness of that ewe, she's a fantastic stocky ewe. I do like those big, stocky sheep. But that having to shear, to me, defies the point of having a shedding sheep. I want shedding sheep. There wasn't much to come off, eh?
No.
But it wasn't going to come off on its own, was it?
No.
That wasn't coming off. Real pity. She was late born, she grew really well.
There you go.
But she's a cull now.
Right.
As soon as you put a handpiece on it, he's gone. So the question for some would be, do you go from a woolly sheep or a not fully shedding sheep to a really good shedding ram? And she did have access to my top ram, and the lamb still didn't shed. Oh yes, I do like that. That motherly instinct that defend themselves. It's something that I really do like. There's lots of decisions to make, and sometimes it can be pretty hard to make a decision with regard to a sheep like that. I've got no history on her breeding. You can see if we get in close, she's got a bit of a chocolate face, a little bit caramel there. Same as the other one, there's a few spotties on her nose. Now I have another hogget that is out of shedding mum and a shedding dad, and she's even more woolly than these two. Her neck's also in the line because I'm not having those sorts of sheep, and I'm trying to find excuses, as I said, to cull sheep at the moment because I have too many, which is a really nice place to be. You've also got the question, is that one, because she did lamb, and see this one didn't lamb, do you keep a hogget that doesn't lamb? And most people would tend to keep them. A little bit more size isn't bad, but then she's actually bigger and she did lamb. And my decision, of course, on this case was to cull both of these, and the butcher's on their way. He should be here very shortly. We won't be showing that. And I normally do my own processing of the sheep, but I've just got too many other things happening in my life right at this point in time. Now, one of the big problems we have with the shedding sheep is the lack of development time. Of course, going back in history, sheep didn't keep their wool, so man has bred the wool to stay on the sheep, or bred the sheep to keep their wool on, if you want to put it that way. And now we're taking it off again because wool has become an oversupply, less demand, and basically it becomes a byproduct of farming sheep. And in many cases it's costing people money. But the development on sheep breeding in the woolly area is vast. There's a lot more performance related breeding in that area. So it does come down to the question, do you incorporate some woolly breeds into your shedding sheep to increase the performance with the possible impact on the shedding of the sheep? I've got plenty of sheep. I've got more sheep than I need. So it's kind of a nice place to be. It's taken me 3 years to get to that point, and I'm not planning on buying any more ewes, because the ewes born on this property generally are my better sheep, providing I get the right ram. I stuffed up with last year's ram. It was actually 2022's ram, and that's where a couple of non-shedding progeny turned up. We're going to have another discussion about this again, because I've got another one of these type sheep. I can show you the dam and the sire, or photos of the sire, because he's not around anymore. And again, that they didn't shed, so they're getting culled. But of course that same swap, that same combination, I've got another one, I've got two of that one, may produce a shedding sheep, so it's going to be interesting to see how that one develops. Or changing the ram. This girl here, the big one, or both of these, may produce nice shedding lambs with the correct ram, or with a different ram to what I used, because the mix didn't work. So, question for you, if you've got this far, are you keeping it, or are you culling it? And of course that is going to depend on your system and the sheep that you've got. My decision today is culling it. I don't always make the right decisions, and you kind of can't go back. It's kind of a permanent decision when the butcher's on his way, isn't it? I can't go see what the sheep is, but I also can't run too many sheep, because I'd rather have too much grass than not enough. But I really want to focus on my present crop of ewe lambs and poking as much grass into them as I can, and I've got sufficient ewes to give me enough going forward. Interesting enough, I've been watching or searching the internet for different ideas around this concept, and I found some people who run full Wiltshires, but I've also found a few guys that are running into the composites where they're blending in other sheep, and some have accepted that a once a year shearing is acceptable, and these two sheep would actually fit very well into some of their flocks where they've got a probably about a 60% shed there, and they use the comb. They run a comb over them once a year, flick the wool off once a year. It's actually the wool isn't that long on these two sheep now, and they call that acceptable if they're getting greater performance and breeding more lambs, growing more fat lambs. Personally, that is my old shearing plant, and it hasn't been used in so long that it no longer works. So I don't want sheep that I have to have any shearing equipment of any kind. So absolutely comment below. Well, let's open to some discussion, have a chat, whether you would keep them, whether you'd cull them, and a little bit maybe about your system of where you are in that swapping or that heading or that shedding sheep journey. Sort of can't change your mind now, eh?